On the morning after their wedding, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the crumpled napkin with frosting still stuck to it. A single knife, dulled with age, lay beside a plate smeared with cake. They had left the crumbs and laughter behind. Just not for me. I found the itinerary by accident, left open on the printer tray in the den. 2 round-trip tickets to Maui, first class, and a luxury villa rental confirmation addressed to my home address. With my name still on the deed, they were spending their honeymoon in my house. And they didn't even tell me. I'm Clara Jennings, 68, and that was the moment I knew I was no longer part of the story. Not even as a footnote. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The night before had been the wedding. My grandson wore suspenders and danced until he was dizzy. My daughter-in-law's mother gave a toast that lasted longer than the ceremony. No one asked if I wanted to say something, not even a word. I sat near the back, behind a pillar that blocked half my view of the couple. When I rose to use the restroom during the reception, my place card was gone when I returned. They cleared my dinner, assuming I'd left. No one noticed. No one said a word. I stayed the night because it was late, and the Uber driver never came. I lay on the basement pull-out couch, my own sheets from years ago still folded in a linen closet, while they slept upstairs in my master bedroom. In the house I refinanced twice to keep when my husband died. They didn't ask, not once. I used to tell myself that love was a quiet thing, and maybe it is. But erasure is even quieter. It doesn't announce itself. It simply takes the air from the room and waits for you to notice you're choking. I drove to the county office just after they left for the airport. I had already been considering it, quietly, like you do with things that don't feel quite real yet. I'd had the paperwork in my safe since spring just in case. That morning, I opened the envelope, ironed the edges flat with my hand, and signed it in blue ink. The notary was polite. She didn't ask questions. The man who bought the house was a retired schoolteacher, newly single, looking for peace. I sold it for half what it was worth. I told him I wanted it done quickly. He said he could move in next month. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to, and that was how it began. I've heard people say that motherhood is the highest form of love because it asks everything of you, without any promise in return. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it just makes it easier for the world to forget you once you served your purpose. I wasn't always this woman, quiet and uninvited, sitting behind pillars at weddings. I was once a flame in a kitchen that never stopped glowing. I was a woman who made pancakes in the shape of animals before school, who sewed Halloween costumes late into the night with calloused fingers. I was the one who drove the minivan through for states when my son was applying for colleges, just to make sure he knew he had options, even when we didn't have much money left for gas. My son, Matthew, was born in the spring of 1983 during one of those southern storms that feels like the earth is trying to split itself open. I remember holding him the first time and thinking, here you are, finally. A reason to stop thinking about myself. A reason to keep the house warm and the fridge full. His father, Alan, was a kind man, but he didn't know how to sit still. He'd disappear for long stretches on construction jobs, sometimes without calling. I think he loved us in his own drifting way, but it was always me who held the fabric of the family together. When Alan passed in 2009, it wasn't tragic, it was expected. His heart had always carried too much noise. He died in his recliner, watching the game. By then, Matthew had moved back home, just for a little while, he said, to help out. It turned into 5 years. He brought the woman who would become his wife around the 3rd year. Brielle. She had that soft, smiley way of being polite without really looking you in the eye. I don't blame her. I imagine I didn't fit the life she wanted. I was an echo in the hallway when she needed a blank wall to start fresh. Still, I gave. I cleared out the master bedroom so they could have more space. I offered it like it was nothing. Though it wasn't, that room had held the echoes of my marriage, the deep breath of my first morning as a widow. I packed away my wedding photos, the press bouquet, even the quilt my grandmother hand-stitched and gave us on our wedding night. I told them I preferred the smaller guest room anyway. I said it with a smile. That's what mothers do. When Matthew lost his job during the pandemic, I deferred the mortgage. I used what was left of my retirement to cover the difference. I canceled my dental surgery and told him the clinic was backed up. I let him keep his pride. Birthdays came and went. I baked the same chocolate cake every year, just like his father used to love. I kept track of their anniversaries, their job interviews, and their friends' baby showers. I picked up groceries when they were too tired. I picked up prescriptions when they were too busy. I watched their dog. I mowed the lawn. And I even unclogged the upstairs tub more times than I want to admit. I just kept showing up. Like love does when it's trying not to be loud. They would thank me. But it was the kind of thank you that sounds like you're nodding while scrolling on your phone. Not cruel, just absent. There were nights I'd hear them laughing in the kitchen. My kitchen, and I'd sit upstairs holding my breath, waiting for them to call me down for wine or leftovers. They never did. I started keeping a small bowl of cereal on my nightstand. Like a child hiding snacks, it was easier than facing the silence in the fridge. I told myself that this was what family looked like now. People get busy. Boundaries are important. I read articles online about not being a boomer burden on your adult children. I watched videos on decluttering your life and practicing gratitude. I meditated. I kept busy. I said nothing. I remember the Christmas when they asked if we could keep things simple this year. I had already wrapped their gifts. A watch I'd saved up for. A signed first edition of a novel Brielle once mentioned she loved. I didn't give them. I just nodded, unwrapped the boxes quietly, and returned them the next day. They gave me a candle set. Lavender and sage. It's not about things. It never was. It was about being remembered. I ironed his graduation gown. I rubbed vapor rub on his chest when he had the flu. I cried in the laundry room when he got his first acceptance letter. I cheered so hard at his soccer games that once I lost my voice for a week. I hosted every Thanksgiving until my hands hurt from chopping. And when he told me they needed help with the down payment, I didn't hesitate. I added him to the D because that's what family does. Those were his words. I thought love would be a kind of armor, that all the giving would wrap me in something soft. Something that couldn't be pierced by forgetfulness or distance. But it didn't protect me. It made me invisible. The morning I sold the house, I walked into the garage and saw the old tricycle still hanging from the wall. Red, rusting. A relic from when he was 3, and insisted on riding it down the driveway every afternoon. Until the sun sank, I used to wait at the bottom with my arms out, just in case he veered too far. He doesn't veer toward me anymore. And still, I don't hate him. That's the part I think most people won't understand. I don't hate either of them. I don't want revenge or some grand apology. I just wanted to feel like I still mattered. Like I wasn't just a shadow that moved when they needed something from the fridge. Love isn't loud, but neither is erasure. So I gave them everything: time, space, money, and silence. And they built a life inside my house like I was a temporary one. The help, the wallpaper, the soft hands that folded towels and disappeared behind doors. That's the thing about giving everything. Eventually, there's nothing left to take. It doesn't happen all at once. The way people pull away from you, there's no trumpet, no slammed door. It's not some screaming match that ends with luggage on the porch and names you can't take back. No, it's slower, quieter. Like a slow leak in the tire you never noticed until your car starts pulling to the side. At first, it was the phone calls. I used to hear from Matthew every Sunday like clockwork, even after he moved back in. It became our little habit. Then it shifted, first to every other week, then maybe once a month, then never. Because we lived under the same roof, we'll just talk at dinner, he'd say. But dinner became a tray in my lap and the hum of the microwave. I stopped setting the table. No one noticed. I began keeping a notebook, just small things, dates mostly. April 17th. They ate the last of my yogurt again. May 5th, missed my podiatry appointment. No one remembered to drive me. June 9th. Brielle asked me to knock next time before entering my own kitchen. I wrote it down not out of spite, but so I wouldn't gaslight myself. So I could remember it was real. I'd reread those notes some nights. The way people reread old letters from lovers. Except mine were from a house that had stopped writing back. They started locking the upstairs bathroom. I'm not sure when it began. Maybe after they got engaged. They never said why. I still had my little guest bathroom, but it creaked and sometimes didn't flush right. I didn't complain. I just kept a plunger behind the door and used a nightlight. When I got up at 3 a.m. because the main light buzzed and then there was the thermostat. It became a kind of battleground, though no one ever said it out loud. I turned it up just a little during winter, my joints aching the cold, and by midday it'd be turned back down again. I'd sneak to adjust it like a child stealing cookies. It's a strange thing to live in a house you pay for and still feel like you're doing something wrong by trying to stay warm. When the holidays came, they made plans without me, not harshly, not cruelly, just assumed Christmas Eve at her parents', they said, then brunch with friends, and after that, a little trip to the mountains. They left me a tin of cookies on the counter and a note that said, "Be back Tuesday." I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and stared at the snow starting to cover the steps. I didn't cry. I've learned that tears rarely change anything, especially when no one's around to see them. People think loneliness is about being alone. It's not. It's about being forgotten while you're still right there in the room. It's passing someone in the hallway and realizing they don't look up anymore. It's birthdays where the only card comes from your pharmacy, reminding you it's time to refill your prescription. They stopped asking me to join them, dinner with friends, a quick trip to the market, a movie night in the living room. They used to invite me out of politeness maybe, or habit. But over time, even that stopped. The assumption became that I'd say no, so they didn't ask, and after a while, I stopped coming down the stairs when I heard the front door slam shut. And then there were the digital things. They switched the Netflix password one day, just changed it. I asked once and got a mumbled "oh, yeah, we had to reset it." But they never gave it to me again. I didn't push. I started rereading old books instead, the spines cracked from years of use. Pages yellowed in that soft way only time can make. They invited people over more often, too. Friends I didn't know, coworkers I'd never met. The house would fill with laughter and music. The smell of wine and roasted things. I'd stay upstairs, mostly. Sometimes I'd crack the window open just to feel like I was outside of it all, watching a world that had moved on. Once, I came downstairs to get a glass of water during one of their parties. Someone I didn't know asked if I was a housekeeper. I didn't correct them. It was easier. There were things they took over time, little things that shouldn't matter. A quilt I kept in the linen closet, suddenly on their couch. A set of mugs my sister gave me, now filled with herbal teas and left half finished on the porch. They never asked. I doubt they even knew they were mine. And every time I said nothing, I felt myself fading, like I was practicing how to disappear. One evening, I noticed a new frame on the hallway wall, their engagement photo. Lovely, of course. Her in white, him in a blazer. I stood there a long time, looking at it. Then I looked at the space beside it, where my wedding photo used to hang. It had been taken down, quietly, without ceremony. No one asked, no one said a word. I found it weeks later in a storage bin in the garage, wrapped in bubble wrap, as if it had been packed away along with anything else that didn't match the decor. I left it there. That same week, I realized something else had changed. My name was no longer on the mailbox, just theirs, new, glossy letters and neat black vinyl. It struck me, that erasure, more than the photo ever could, because it wasn't just symbolic, it was logistical. I stood there holding a gas bill and a magazine I didn't remember subscribing to, and for a moment, I couldn't decide whether to place the mail back in the box or take it in. I still don't know what I expected. Maybe a thank you, maybe a moment of stillness where one of them would look at me and remember, not for what I gave, but for who I was, for who I still am. There's something about 100 small hurts that does more damage than one loud betrayal. Because you can't point to them, you can't say, "Here, right here, this is the moment I was broken." It's death by omission, by dismissal, by neglect that wears a polite smile and a busy schedule. I started walking in the evenings, just to get out, round the block at first, then farther. I watched as neighbors hung string lights, walked there. Dogs watered their lawns, some waved, some didn't. I liked the quiet, I liked being no one. I passed by a bench near the lake one day, and saw an old woman sitting alone, feeding birds with a small bag of seeds. I nodded to her, she nodded back. We didn't speak, but in that moment I knew she understood. You don't have to be mistreated to be erased. You just have to be tolerated long enough to stop mattering. And so I did what people do when they realize the ground beneath them is shifting. I learned to walk more carefully. I stopped offering. I stopped expecting. I grew quieter, and somewhere in that silence, something new began to grow. But not yet, not quite yet. It was a Thursday. Late summer. It was the type of afternoon where the sun casts a long shadow across the floorboards. And if you don't move too quickly, you can almost pretend everything is fine. I had gone out to buy light bulbs just two for the hallway that had started flickering every time I walked through it. Funny how that happens. Things begin to blink at you, as if even the house is trying to say something. When I came home, there were voices upstairs. I hadn't known they were home. It used to startle me, hearing people in my house without warning. By then, it barely registered. I set the groceries down, just the bulbs, a loaf of bread, and a small jar of strawberry preserves I liked but never saw in the pantry anymore. I was halfway to the stairs when I heard my name. Not Mom, not Clara, just my full name, said flat and fast, like it was a name on a list. I mean, she's technically still on it, Brill's voice said. Then his. But we'll handle it once we're married, the lawyer said. It's just paperwork. I didn't mean to listen. I didn't mean to stop breathing either. But something about the way they said it, the ease of it, told me I needed to keep still. Needed to let the words finish their shape before they realized they were being heard. She won't fight it, she said. She doesn't even check the mail. It's basically ours already. Then, silence. A drawer opened. There was a clatter of silverware. I don't remember what I did next. Not exactly. I think I walked into the den and sat down like nothing had shifted. I think I stared at the floral pattern on the couch cushion and tried to remember how many years I'd had it. I think I held the receipt, or I held the preserves in my hand while trying to focus on the ink. Later that night, I went into the attic. There's a kind of grief that makes you move like a ghost. I was unable to think clearly. Just motion. I opened the old filing cabinet, second drawer from the bottom. Inside was a thick folder, yellowing around the edges. The deed, the mortgage statements, the notarized documents from 2015, when I added Matthew as a co-owner to help with refinancing. It was supposed to protect us both. That folder used to be my safety net, my proof. But as I turned the pages, I noticed something that didn't make sense. A letter dated barely 6 weeks ago, from a law office I didn't recognize. The letter was addressed to me, but it had never been opened, not by me anyway. It had been sliced cleanly across the top, as if someone else had handled it, then tucked it back like nothing happened. The contents were brief: a notice of transfer initiation, a proposed adjustment to the property title, legalese, mostly. Although the language was cold and legalistic, the meaning was clear. They were attempting to strip me of my rights to the house, not sell it, just reposition it, quietly, neatly. My signature was there, only I hadn't signed it. It was my name, but not my hand. I sat there in the attic for a long time. I stayed in the attic for a longer period than I intended to. The insulation itched through my sleeves, dust clung to the hem of my jeans outside. The street lamp flickered on. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling. That sweet charcoal smell mixed with something sharp in the back of my throat. I thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe a neighbor, but I couldn't think of anyone who still picked up. So I just sat with it. The forged signature weighed heavily on me, that echo of my own name, used without me, and suddenly, all those little quiet hurts weren't little anymore. They weren't separate, they stacked into something solid. The object was tall, cold, and immovable. That was the line. It wasn't about the house, not really. Not just the wood or the roof or the title typed on thick paper. It was about the part of me that still believed I was safe here, that I was still needed. That love, if not returned, was at least remembered. But this was a rewriting, a removal, a surgical act of erasure. And the part that broke me most wasn't the forgery. It was the confidence. I was confident that I wouldn't notice, that if I did, I wouldn't mind, that I had been made so small over time, I wouldn't bother standing up. They were right, in a way. I didn't shout. I didn't confront them. Instead, I waited. I returned everything to the cabinet. I closed it gently. I didn't even lock it. Then I walked downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and went to bed that night. I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling fan, counted the rotations, wondered how many other moments I had missed moments. When pieces of my life were being moved without my permission. It wasn't just the house. It was my presence in it, my name in conversations, my story in the walls. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink while the coffee percolated. I looked out over the backyard, my backyard, and thought about the lemon tree I planted the year after Alan died. It hadn't borne fruit in a long time, but it still bloomed every spring, quiet and stubborn. I sipped my coffee slowly. That was the day I made the first call. Not to them. Not to anyone I loved. To a lawyer. I found her number in a community flyer tucked in my recipe drawer. Her name was printed in simple black ink beside the phrase, "It's not too late to take back what's yours." I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I just asked questions, listened carefully, wrote down the words that mattered: revocation, legal right, fraud, undue influence. She asked if I wanted to pursue it. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped seeing me as a person. I had become a placeholder, a body in a chair, a name on a bill they wished would go away. And they crossed a line, not with words, but with ink, with intention, with the belief that I wouldn't fight. They didn't realize that silence doesn't mean surrender, that stillness doesn't mean blindness, and that I, Clara Jennings, still remembered who I was. The house wasn't just walls, it was my years, my labor, my grief, and my generosity. It was where I lost and kept finding myself, and if they were willing to sign my name without my permission, then they had already told me what I needed to know. They weren't family anymore. They were tenants of a kindness they no longer deserved, and it was time to begin again. There wasn't a grand confrontation, no slammed doors, no voices raised above the hum of the refrigerator, just me and the quiet. And a decision that settled over me like a fresh layer of snow, clean, weightless. But with something underneath it beginning to shift, I stopped speaking. Not entirely. Not in the way that frightens people. I still said good morning. Still nodded politely when they passed me in the hallway. I smiled when required. But the part of me that reached, that explained, that softened things for their comfort, that part one folded up neatly and placed in a drawer. And I didn't take it out again. The day after I found the forged signature, I sat with the weight of it like a guest at my own table. I set a place for it in my mind. I poured it tea. I didn't try to push it away, or reframe it, or reason it into something less painful. I simply let it be real. The lawyer I called had a calm voice. Her name was Lorraine. She didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. She told me what I needed to know. That my name was still valid on the deed. That any changes made without my consent were null if challenged. That forged signatures were not only illegal, but prosecutable. I didn't want a courtroom. I didn't want drama. I wanted distance and dignity. I began to collect things, not objects, but evidence, dates, printouts, voicemails, digital statements. I printed a copy of the altered document and circled the signature. I took a photo of it beside a check I'd written, just so the difference was visible. I made a list of the dates I'd been gone when certain letters were opened, including the unopened mail I later found tittied in the garage storage bins. I wasn't building a case out of vengeance, I was building one out of protection. The kind of protection I'd spent decades giving everyone else but myself. I moved slowly, deliberately. I stopped offering to pick up groceries. I let the dishes sit in the sink when they left them there. I no longer refilled the soap in their bathroom. I didn't clean out the lint trap in the dryer. I let the small things go where they went. Brill started to notice. She asked once, "Are you feeling okay, Clara?" I just smiled and said, "Fine, thank you." I think she knew something was different, but she wasn't curious enough to ask again. And Matthew, he was busy, always busy, meetings, calls, that was the excuse, at least. But more than that, he had begun to look at me like someone too delicate to handle truth and too stubborn to bother explaining it to. That soft condescension that seeps in when people assume your age has made you fragile. I let him believe it. It gave me more room to move. I opened a new savings account, quietly, just a small amount transferred weekly from my checking, which still had access to the joint mortgage account. I began calling it my just-in-case fund. I also got a PO box, I told no one. I redirected my bank statements and legal correspondence there, one envelope at a time. Every Friday, I would take a walk under the pretense of getting exercise. But I would veer off and check that small, silver box. It became my ritual. It was the only place that still felt like mine. There's a kind of strength in silence that people overlook. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it waits, it gathers. It becomes something stronger than noise. I found an old notebook in the back of my dresser drawer and began journaling again. Just small entries at first, 1 page a night. I wrote down what I saw, what I felt, what I remembered, not for anyone else. Just to remind myself that my version of the story still existed, that I was still a witness, even if no one else was watching. I started sleeping better, and I began to remember things I hadn't thought about in years. Like the way Alan used to sit in the garage with the door halfway open, smoking his cheap little cigars, pretending he was fixing something, or the way Matthew used to crawl into bed with me when he had nightmares, his small body trembling like a leaf. Where had that boy gone? I think I knew the answer. He'd grown up in a world that teaches people how to take without guilt if the taking is quiet enough. He'd learned to treat care as currency, to see generosity not as love, but as leverage. And maybe I had taught him that, in my own way, by giving and giving until there was nothing left to take. That realization hurt the most, but it also freed me. I stopped waiting for a thank you, stopped expecting an apology that would never come, and I let go of the version of myself that kept asking, what did I do wrong? Because this wasn't about wrong, this was about value, and somewhere along the way, mine had been downgraded to convenience. One morning, I found the envelope again, the one with the forged signature. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it into a new envelope with a letter of my own. Simple, direct. I am aware of this. Please don't try again. No threats, no emotion, just fact. I mailed it to the P.O. box registered to Matthew's consulting business. I never received a reply, but things shifted after that. They moved more carefully around me. I heard them whispering sometimes when they thought I was upstairs, and still, I said nothing. Because silence had become my sword, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was focused. There was something almost sacred about it. The way clarity arrives not with a bang, but a breeze. The way you begin to see your life not as a chain of sacrifices, but as a map you're finally allowed to redraw. I began planning for something else, not escape exactly, but change. I wanted to move differently now, to step out of the shadow I had let them place me in. I spent less time in the house, more time at the library, the community garden, walking trails. I struck up small conversations with people whose names I didn't know. I smiled more. I began to feel like someone again, not just a mother, not just a body in a chair, but Clara Jennings, a woman whose silence had become the soil in which something unspoken had begun to grow. And I wasn't quite ready to bloom yet, but the roots were down and they were strong. It was the small things that changed first, not the kind people noticed, just the things that told me I was no longer walking through life with my head bowed. Like the way I began to carry my keys in my front pocket instead of tucked in the side drawer by the door, where I'd always left them for their convenience. Or how I started using the front door instead of slipping out through the garage, like a shadow trying not to disturb the light. I still lived in the house, technically, but it had started to feel more like a place I was passing through rather than rooted in. I began to treat it the way a guest treats a hotel room: tidy, respectful, but without illusion of belonging. I stopped decorating for the seasons. The little wreaths I used to hang on the pantry door stayed boxed in the attic. The pumpkin-scented candles remained sealed. I even left the garden beds to go bare. A slow rebellion in the dirt, they noticed in their own way. Brill made a comment one afternoon about the yard looking a little tired, as if I was its groundskeeper, and not the one who once planted every perennial by hand. Matthew asked, half-heartedly, if I wanted help with the gutters. I told him no, thank you. I had already hired someone, a man from the community board who had fixed my porch steps last winter, a man who called me Miss Jennings and took off his shoes before coming inside. I began to surround myself with people who saw me. It wasn't many. I wasn't trying to build a new world overnight. but of the community garden. There was a woman named Evelyn who had hands like mine, weathered but strong, and who talked softly about basil like it was a sacrament. At the library, there was a retired teacher who always saved me a chair near the poetry shelves, and once a week, I'd sit in on a free estate planning seminar hosted by a woman named Lorraine, the same Lorraine who took my first quiet phone call. She became more than a lawyer. She became someone who spoke to me like my voice mattered, like the things I'd held back for years were worth hearing. She didn't give me advice unless I asked. She never treated me like I was fragile or foolish. She told me stories about other women who had been erased, manipulated, pushed into corners by the people they loved most. Some of them had fought back, some had simply stepped away. All of them, she said, had one thing in common. They had waited too long to reclaim their name. That stayed with me. I started spending hours at the county office, pulling records, learning what my signature gave away and what it still protected. I looked up my deed history, printed forms, highlighted phrases like grantor intent and revocation rights. It became its own kind of education, a quiet pursuit. No one knew. Back at home, they were planning their wedding. There was talk of venues, colors, appetizers, a gestrio. I heard it through closed doors and echoing staircases. They didn't ask if I wanted to be involved. That was no longer a surprise. Then one morning, I came down to make tea and found a wedding binder spread across a dining room table. Page after page of their life to be, mapped out in ink and swatches. I flipped through it, not out of curiosity, but to confirm something I had already begun to suspect. There was no mention of me, no seat assignment, no corsage, no photograph planned beside the cake. Just a line at the bottom of a page labeled accommodations that read, staying at Mom's place. She'll be fine with it. Not Clara's. Not her home, Mom's place. I remember standing there for a long moment, staring at that line, not in pain, but in clarity. They assumed I'd be there, that I'd be invisible, helpful, quiet again, that I'd wash the linens and stock the fridge, that I'd disappear when the guests arrived and return when the champagne was gone. But they had mistaken my silence for permission, and I had moved differently now. That same day, I called Lorraine, told her I was ready. The transfer was quiet, legal, final. I sold the house to a retired teacher named Grant who had recently gone through a divorce. He didn't want much, just peace, he said. I liked him immediately. He offered below market, and I accepted on the spot, not out of desperation, but because I didn't want to haggle over the value of something that had already taken so much from me. We closed in less than 3 weeks. I made arrangements while they were out one weekend registering gifts, I assume. I packed only what belonged to me: my mother's tea set, my journals, 2 small boxes of photos I refused to leave behind. I left the furniture, the dishes, the linens. I didn't want any of it anymore. Let them have it. Let it all echo when they returned. And then I found a place. A little 1-bedroom cottage on the far end of town. Not much to look at from the road, but with a porch that catches the light in the morning and a window seat where I can read. The landlord asked for references. I gave him Lorraine's number. By the time Matthew and Brill came back from their wedding errand, the house was no longer theirs to assume. The lock had been changed, a simple note on the door, new ownership. Please contact Grant for access. No forwarding address, no explanation. I didn't need to be there to see their faces. I could picture it easily, the shock, the denial, the slow realization. I imagined them walking the halls looking for the pieces I took only to find none missing, because the things they cared about were never mine to begin with. That was the freedom of it. I moved differently after that. Not with anger, not even with pride, just with the quiet knowledge that I no longer had to wait for someone to remember I was there. I was living now. Not loudly, not for show, but in a space that was finally mine, in a life where every step I took was made without apology. And they would feel the absence, in the echo of their own voices calling for someone who no longer answered. The first sign that they felt my absence came quietly, just like the way they had trained themselves to ignore my presence. A missed call from an unfamiliar number, no message left, then another. Finally, A voicemail I listened to, with the phone resting on the kitchen table as I sipped chamomile from the same mug they once borrowed and never returned. It was Matthew. His voice had that careful tone people use when they aren't sure who they're speaking to anymore. He said they'd come home to find the house reassigned. As if it had just wandered off, he asked where I was, if I was all right. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't say he was sorry. Just that there had been a misunderstanding, and they wished we could talk. I let the message sit there. I didn't return the call. I wasn't angry. I just no longer had anything to explain. They hadn't noticed me when I was there. Why would I make it easy for them to notice now? A week later, Brilla mailed. It was short, impersonal, asking if I'd left anything behind that I wanted returned. She attached a photo of a pie dish, a birthday card, my shawl. I told her to donate them. That I hoped someone would find use in what had been overlooked. That was all I said. It's a strange thing to be absent. At first it feels like loss. Then it becomes a kind of power. They didn't just lose the house. They lost the silence that made their lives run smooth. They lost the things they never thanked me for because they assumed they were just there. The clean towels folded in the linen closet, the way the fridge always had oat milk, the tiny repairs to hinges and drains, the way the light stayed working, the thermostat stayed steady, the laundry rotated without their attention. They lost the kind of love that never advertised itself, and I watched it happen from a distance. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. It started with the wedding. They had planned everything around the house decor, flow, guests, the layout for photographs. It wasn't just a location to them, it was the background of their life. The stage where they were ready to take center spotlight, assuming I would stay hidden behind the curtain. Now, they had no venue, no fallback. The new owner, Grant, didn't entertain pleas. He had moved in with his dog and his coffee grinder, and a firm understanding of contracts. They had to scrap the garden reception. I heard, through Evelyn at the garden club, that they ended up hosting it at a banquet hall behind a mall. I didn't ask, I didn't attend. The invitation came late, unsigned, with a printed or SVP card, the kind that doesn't ask if you'll come, but quietly hopes you won't. I folded it neatly and placed it in my fireplace. Watched it curl at the edges before it turned to ash. They hadn't just lost the house. They lost history. All the quiet years stitched into the wallpaper. The worn-wood floors that held the weight of our shared past. They lost the comfort of knowing someone would keep things steady when life got messy. They lost the hand that had steadied their sail without ever asking for credit. I think it took time for them to really understand, because people like Matthew and Brill believe in replaceability. They think anything can be substituted, homes, memories. People, it's how they survive, it's how they justify the taking. But it doesn't work like that. Not everything can be replaced. I think they learned that slowly, in the silences between their new routines. When the bills came, and there was no one to sort them. When one of them got sick and the other had to remember which tea eases the stomach. When the sink leaked and no one had already scheduled the plumber. They lost the foundation. And I built a new one. My cottage is small, but sunlight lives in it. I filled the shelf with books I once forgot I loved. I keep fresh herbs by the window and talk to them like they're old friends. I've begun taking photos again, nothing fancy, just small things, a cup on the windowsill, the shape of light on the hardwood, my own hand reaching for something warm. I don't talk about them much. When people ask, I say my son is married now, and we've drifted some. It's easier that way. The truth is too sharp for small conversations. But sometimes I let myself miss him. Not the man he is now, but the boy he used to be. The one who called me mama and brought me wildflowers in a plastic cup. The one who once needed me without knowing how to take advantage of that need. I keep one picture of him in the hallway, tucked behind a small watercolor I painted last winter. He's 6 in it, tooth missing, shirt half tucked, smiling like nothing bad has ever happened. I look at it when I forget why I left. And I remember, he never lost me suddenly. He lost me by degrees, by the way he stopped listening, stopped seeing, by the choice to view me as furniture instead of family. And I didn't leave to punish them. I left because I finally understood. What I had spent so long denying that I was not required to be present in places that treated me as optional. Sometimes I wonder if he started to understand that. He hasn't called again, not in months. But last week a letter came, no return address, just my name, handwritten, in the same crooked scrawl he had as a boy. I haven't opened it yet. It sits on my mantel beside the rosemary plant that I thought had died, but began to grow again once I moved it into the sun. I'm not ready, but I might be soon. It was a Thursday again, which I didn't realize until the kettle clicked off, and I looked at the calendar hanging crooked on the kitchen wall. It was the same sort of day that had started everything, sun slanting through the blinds, a breeze just beginning to flirt with the edges of fall. My hands were wrapped around a cup of weak chamomile when I finally walked over to the mantel and picked up the letter. I had been staring at it for almost 2 weeks. It hadn't moved, it hadn't changed. But something in me had, slowly, quietly, the way leaves decide to let go, one at a time. The envelope was soft at the corners from being touched so much. I turned it over, slid my finger under the flap, and opened it without drama. No breath held. No prayers, just a quiet readiness. The letter was short. I read it once, then again. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a reaching, and that mattered more. He wrote that he didn't know where I'd gone, but he knew why. He said he replayed everything in his mind, the things he'd said, the things he hadn't. He wrote that he didn't understand what it meant to have someone hold the weight of your world until the day she quietly set it down. He said he thought love could be assumed, inherited. He said he now understood that it couldn't. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he was sorry. There was a moment after I finished reading when I didn't know what to do. The quiet in the cottage stretched long, but it wasn't hollow. It felt full of time, of memory, of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the first hurt had started to settle inside me. I folded the letter gently and placed it back inside the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, hand resting over it, letting myself feel the simple, unremarkable power of being seen. It's strange how letters can carry the weight of things we couldn't say aloud. I used to write them, though I never sent them. For years they lived in the back of my dresser, tucked between linens and old postcards. Letters to Alan after he passed, letters to my younger self, and more recently, letters I wrote late at night to no one in particular, trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. I pulled one of them out that evening. It was a letter I had written the night after they left me off the wedding itinerary, when I realized the house would be filled with people and I would be a ghost in the background. I had written it like a confession. Dear Clara, it began, not dear Mom or dear you, just my name, the woman I had become. I read it slowly, out loud, the way you read a poem not meant for anyone else. The pages were smudged in places. A T-ring marked the corner. It was honest, it was raw. I had written, you did everything they asked, you gave without record. You folded yourself into the shape of their lives and called it love. But that isn't love, is it? Not the kind that sees, not the kind that stays. And near the bottom, you are not broken, you were just quiet for too long. And now that you're speaking with your silence, don't let them make you doubt the sound of it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a new letter, this time not to defend myself, not to grieve, but to say goodbye. I wrote it to the part of me that had stayed small, the part that had waited at the top of the stairs for an invitation to join the laughter, the part that had refilled soap bottles and folded laundry just to feel needed. I told her she had done enough, that she had loved well, that it wasn't her fault, and I told her she could rest now. I lit a candle, no ceremony, no music, just the scent of something clean, something warm. I read the letter one last time, then burned it in a small ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class that spring. The ash curled inward, soft and gray, like it understood what was being released. Outside, the sun dipped low over the trees, and the birds were quieting. I opened the window and let the air move through the room. It smelled like rosemary and new beginnings. The letter from Matthew stayed on the mantel for a few more days. Then one morning, I placed it in a box with other small things I wanted to keep. Not because I wanted to revisit the pain, but because part of healing is remembering the shape of what hurt you, so you don't invite it back in under a new name. That same week, I ran into Evelyn at the garden. She said I looked lighter. I said maybe I was. She offered me a cutting from her lemon balm plant, and I tucked it into the corner of my tote bag. It rooted in a small clay pot on my windowsill. I don't know if I'll ever write Matthew back. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, only honored for what they once carried. But I do know that if I ever see him again, I'll be able to look him in the eye not as someone waiting for recognition, but as someone who has already recognized herself. That's what the letter gave me, not forgiveness, not closure, but permission to move on, to love myself, to stop bending toward people who have forgotten the shape of my care, to begin again fully, quietly, with all the strength that silence taught me, and to know that the story didn't end when they left me behind. It ended when I stopped leaving myself behind, too. The mornings here are slow, and I've grown to love that. There's no rush, no one moving around me with their clipped footsteps and half-spoken plans. I wake up when the light slips gently across the room, a soft golden stripe that falls just beneath the window and climbs its way over my blankets. I stretch, I sit for a while, I breathe. The kettle takes exactly 4 minutes to sing, and while it warms, I step onto the porch and watch the day begin. The garden is modest raised beds, a patch of mint that grows like it is something to prove, but it's mine. The tomatoes are coming in slow this year. The basil is leggy, the rosemary is thriving. Sometimes I talk to them. I don't expect them to answer, but it feels good to be known, even by the earth. I don't see many people, but I'm not lonely. The neighbors wave from their porches. I chat with Evelyn at the garden on Saturdays, and sometimes we trade cuttings or bread. She bakes when her arthritis allows. I knit when my fingers remember how. We laugh quietly and often. The library keeps me company on cloudy afternoons. There's an old rocking chair near the fiction wall, and the staff let me stay as long as I like. I've reread Toni Morrison, found comfort in Wendell Berry, and discovered a deep affection for Mary Oliver. Her words feel like walking barefoot through cool grass, like someone reminding you the sky was never meant to be ignored. Every Tuesday I walk to the cafe 2 blocks down, the one with chipped mugs and the good jam. I bring my journal. I write letters I'll never send, notes to myself mostly. I trace a line between who I was and who I've become and marvel at how far the distance feels and how little I needed to pack for the journey. I don't check social media anymore. Not that I ever used it much. But now I avoid even the passive glimpses, no photos, no updates, no chance of seeing their life move forward without me. I don't say that bitterly, I mean it gently. I have released the urge to be part of a story I no longer recognize. I've made peace with what I left, and more importantly, I've made peace with what I kept. There are still moments, of course. A song comes on the radio while I'm dusting. A photo falls out of a drawer I thought I'd already emptied. The smell of a certain brand of laundry soap, like the one I used when Matthew was little, I let those memories visit me like old friends I no longer need to invite to stay. I still keep his letter in a drawer, the one he sent without asking for forgiveness. I've read it a handful of times, each reading softer than the last. I don't carry it with me anymore, but I haven't thrown it out either. Some things don't need closure. They just need quiet. I think a lot about the version of me that stayed in that house too long. That woman who gave and waited and kept folding other people's choices into origami explanations for why she wasn't angry. I think of her and I feel gratitude. She did her best. She didn't know she was disappearing. She thought she was being loyal. And maybe she was. Maybe we need to lose ourselves and other people to understand how precious it is to come back home to our own voice. I write that voice down now, line by line. My journal is nearly full, not with stories of betrayal or heartbreak, but with recipes I've remembered, things I've grown, notes about the birds that visit my window box. There's a pair of cardinals that arrive every morning around the same time. They don't stay long, but they always come back sometimes. I sit in the stillness and wonder what they would say to me if they could. You made it, maybe. You didn't vanish, you just took a different path, and now you're here, alive, whole, quiet. There's a small bench near the edge of the woods, where the sun falls just right in the late afternoon. I go there often, bring a thermos, maybe a book, sit for an hour or two. I listen to the wind move through the trees, and the trees respond with their ancient, rustling speech. The world doesn't rush me anymore. I have become a woman no longer, pressed against the glass of someone else's life. I no longer wait to be called into the room. I am the room now. Every once in a while, I think about writing Matthew again. Not for reconciliation, just to say, I'm all right. I hope you are, too. But I don't. I think he knows, and if he doesn't, that's no longer mine to carry. I've carried enough. The quiet here is not empty. It's full of texture, the ticking of the clock, the chirp of the oven when it finishes, the distant hum of a lawnmower to house us down, the kind of sounds that say, you are here. And it is enough. There is nothing grand about my days. I water my plants. I make soup. I take long baths with music playing low from a speaker on the counter. Sometimes I nap in the afternoon, the kind of deep sleep that tells you your body is safe again. And when I wake, I do not check my phone for missed messages because I am no longer waiting, not for invitations, not for apologies, not for someone to remember that I once mattered. I remember, and that is enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. There are things I know now that I couldn't have learned any earlier, not because I was incapable, but because I was still in the thick of giving, of holding, of hoping, of waiting, and sometimes knowing only blooms in the stillness after everything else has fallen away. I know now that love doesn't mean disappearing, that devotion, if it costs your sense of self, is not sacred, it's sacrificial, and mothers, no matter how much we carry, are not meant to vanish behind the doors we open for others. I know now that it's not selfish to choose yourself, not petty to protect your peace, that boundaries aren't walls or invitations for real connection, drawn clearly in the sand so that no one mistakes your silence for consent. And I know that just because someone comes from you doesn't mean they see you. That truth arrived slowly. It moved through me like light through sheer fabric, revealing more than it changed at first. But now, I let it in. I let it warm me. I let it leave me. I still take my walks. There's a gravel path behind the cottage that winds along a creek. It's not a remarkable trail, but it has its quiet beauties, the shape of driftwood caught in a bend, the low hum of bees in late spring, the way the water sometimes mirrors the sky in pieces. I like that path because it doesn't demand anything of me. I can walk it alone and still feel accompanied. Some days I bring a thermos of coffee, others just my breath and whatever thoughts rise with it. I used to spend so much time trying to be good, not kind good, the kind of good that bends before anyone asks, the kind that apologizes when someone else spills their glass, the kind that folds its joy into bite-sized pieces so others aren't overwhelmed by it. But I know better now. I know that goodness is not about erasing yourself. It's about showing up whole, and showing up whole requires time, patience, and sometimes distance. My phone still rings sometimes, not often. Usually it's Evelyn, or Lorraine checking in, or the man from the garden center letting me know when the seedlings I asked about have arrived. I don't need much. I've learned to ask for what I do need, which used to be the hardest thing for me. Last month, I went back into town for the first time since I left the house. I passed the street without turning in, drove slowly by the place that once held my whole adult life. It looked the same from the outside, more or less. A new flower box, fresh paint on the porch rails. The kind of cosmetic changes people make when they want something to feel like theirs. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. But I noticed something. In the window, a photo frame, too small to see clearly, but it was there, facing outward. It made me wonder, not about being missed, but about being remembered, maybe. In their own quiet way, they had started to see the outline of my absence, the shape of everything I'd once done without asking for credit. The way the house used to hum with something more than electricity, the way it used to feel like home. I don't know if that's what they see now. And I've let go of needing to know. There's a freedom in not chasing answers, in not rehearsing the conversation that will never come, in no longer needing someone to say you were right to feel what you felt. Because what I know now is this: Healing doesn't always come with applause, sometimes. It comes with solitude, with the slow, quiet choice to reclaim your days, your dignity, your direction. I find myself humming again, little songs I used to sing when I was younger. Before the world got too loud, I hum while folding my clothes, while tending to the garden, while slicing peaches in the sunlit kitchen. There's a rhythm to life here that I never knew I craved. And it isn't about what I've built, though I've made the space my own. It's about what I've let fall away. Expectation, obligation, the endless loop of proving my worth. That loop is broken now, and what remains is clean, spacious. It's not joy the way people picture it. It's not laughter every morning or fireworks in the heart. It's steadier than that, more sacred. It's a sense of place inside my own skin. And if Matthew ever finds his way back to me, not with need, but with understanding, I'll be here. Not waiting, just living, and if he doesn't, well, that too will be okay. Because I am no longer a housekeeper in someone else's narrative. I am the story. I am the walls and the light, and the silence between things. I am the ending I used to pray someone else would write for me. And I've written it myself, word by word, step by step, beneath a quiet sky. With a soft kind of courage. This life, now, is not a grand one. It doesn't shine loudly. It doesn't echo with validation. But it is mine, and I wake to it every day with a peace I never thought I'd earn. The world is still spinning, still forgetting people like me, but I am not lost in it anymore. I have grown roots in my own name. I have chosen myself, finally, and I will not unchoose me again.